Next up, we have a non-action item, which is a presentation about the park at 29th and Fairfax.
Pretty good. 40 minutes. I know. I'd never fly.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, Gordon. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Gordon Robertson. I'm the Director of Park Planning, Design, and Construction.
I'm Kelly Ream with Denver Parks and Recreation, and I'm serving as the project manager for outreach and concept design for the park.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today. We are presentation today. We did not have it filed, so we hope to get filed next week and be on your agenda for action.
For next week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Are we having land use next week?
No committee
Or
next
at
week.
No.
the week
It'll
thereafter.
be the week after,
Yep.
right?
In the meantime, I wanted to brief you on this project. As you may or may not be aware, this is an Excel parcel site. Excel approached the city to sell two substations, and they just happened to be in two neighborhoods where we needed parks. They were park deficient neighborhoods. One was Westwood neighborhood in southwest Denver, and the other one was in the Park Hill area. And the Park Hill area has been an area of residential development for more than 100 years and does not have access to parkland as other areas do. So we were excited to get the opportunity to buy these parcels. They're really pocket park size parcels, but we were able to acquire them for $50,000 for two sites. And yes, both, yes, we're both. And so we're excited to be able to do that. As a department, it's difficult for us to find funding to acquire and develop new parks while we maintain the rest of the system. So we felt like this was a great opportunity, and we took advantage of that. As we acquired the parcel, we did not intend to have funding for design and construction immediately. But in the interim, next slide, we were approached by HM Capital, which was developing the block between 28th and 29th Avenue on North Fairfax, across the street from this. Their offer was to fund the design and construction of a similar sized property, exactly the same size, pocket park, on behalf of the department, and then make it a public park. That project moved on in discussion to understand what the deal points would be. And as that project advanced and the conversation advanced, HM Capital developed a plan to show what that park might look like. And that was then made public to the community. It got ahead of our process, which is to work with the public and design the park with the public. And so we immediately stopped that process and then negotiated a deal with HM Capital whereby the property would be swapped, as it will be filed immediately, and it will become city property, at which time we will oversee the design process as well as the construction process. And then at the completion of the construction, it would be a designated city park. So that was a change because the community rightly said that they felt like this was a development-focused open space, and that was not our intention all along. So we have stopped that and made it clear that this will be a public process and a city process and a designated public park. At that time, Greater Park Hill initiated a design process, which we were happy to see that the neighborhood was getting involved. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you. So as Gordon mentioned, we kicked off our outreach process in February. And when we kicked this process off, the Greater Park Hill community had developed a plan documenting the outreach that they had done and the outcome, which was a concept. And I think that through our process, we identified that the design objectives were similar. The community wanted a public park that was open and welcoming to all. They wanted opportunities to gather and also opportunities to play. So our outreach process included, our traditional email updates and website updates. We also wanted to make sure that we were engaging everybody in the surrounding community. So we went out twice and flyered the surrounding 2 blocks. We were also at Stedman Elementary, giving flyers for Thursday folders, and also flyering after school. We had 4 meetings, and at those meetings, we had a total of 170 attendees. We also did an online survey, which I believe was 150 respondents, and 145 of those were from the adjacent community, the Park Hill zip code. So based on all of this input, we developed 3 concepts, exploring different concepts for how do we balance the desire for community gathering space with play. We had a survey, and from that survey, we didn't have clear direction that, there was one clear lead for design, but we did hear, the importance of including traditional play elements like swings and slides, in addition to balancing the need for hardscape and landscape, just turf space.
Yeah, so in the final analysis, it is the same size piece of property. It's across the street. Both sides of the street are essentially zoned for similar commercial and residential uses. So the park on either side of the street would have essentially a similar adjacency when it comes to the built environment. And we believe that a retail adjacency to this park will make it a much more eyes on the park, make it a much more community and family-friendly environment. And so we're excited for this opportunity, as well as the funding provided by the developer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilman New.
Gordon, can you go back to the objective slide? Because it seems like those are objectives I've heard from residents in the community there. And is that, do you have like a design agreement with the neighborhood, or that you could work on as you're working toward the design of this to incorporate that? It sounds like that would be very helpful, because it sounds like those are very similar kind of issues that I've heard.
Yes, those objectives are absolutely our objectives. We've had 3 meetings to date, and certainly explored how we could accommodate those in a way that residents want. And we're committed to having many more meetings to make sure that we get the right design.
It'd be great if, we've used development agreements in the past, effectively, or at least the memorandum of understanding, and incorporating that with the neighborhood, I think would be very effective. So thanks for putting that up there. Sounds very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Espinoza.
Yeah, our first item on the agenda was a historic property on a sort of concept that was big picture and didn't come to fruition, all right? And there's always that possibility. So what sort of guarantees are there that whether the developer completes their development or not, the park will actually be constructed?
That the park will be constructed?
Yeah.
Well, as part of the land swap that will be coming to you, it includes funding that will be part of the land swap that will go into an account for the design and construction of the park. And that will be at our use, at our discretion. So the funding will be there, and we intend to build the park.
So $650,000 is not sufficient to build even a pocket park. So obviously the city has to come to the table with funds to then liberate that escrow money. What is our plan for that, and what's the timetable?
On a per square foot basis, we're pretty close to having the right funding. There certainly could be a discrepancy in the end result of what we end up designing. We don't know, but we hope that will fund the park, and if it doesn't, some additional funding may be required to finish the park.
So what I don't have is a guarantee that the park will actually get built, unless, the only way we have that is if the developer actually follows through with his development plan. So this is not, we will definitely get a park if
we will definitely get a park, and we will definitely fund any difference if there is a difference.
But no timetable.
Our timetable in the agreement is that we will begin construction in October of 2019 on the park. That's in the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman Espinoza actually got to the core of my question, which is $650,000 is not nearly enough. And the cost per square foot might be reasonable, but for a pocket park, the smaller the area, the higher the cost per square foot, of course. And, you're replacing some playgrounds in my district at half of that cost in an existing park. how much, I mean, is 650,000 actually the estimate for design and construction of what we're looking at here?
Well, we're going to,
I got to agree with Councilman Espinoza. That's pretty low.
we'll utilize some initial funding to do design. And when we get into design, we'll then cost estimate what it is
Okay.
that gets designed, and we'll be able to estimate what we need for construction at that time. But typically, it would be 600, to 800,000 to maybe $1 million for a neighborhood park. But this is a much smaller pocket park, so we'll have to estimate when we get the design.
Do we have any small parks like this that are comparable? I know that really small one down on, near Quality Hill, that little.
Quality
pocket
Hill is a comparable, Ferguson is nearby, and that's a little bit bigger.
park. Okay, I'll go look at those. Thanks.
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to break it down a little bit, what we're talking about, right now we have a property that's 125 by 125 and $0. This is a property that's 125, 125 by 125 across the street, and we'd have 650 that we think gets us pretty close to the total that we need, although we might need some more dollars depending on what the community really wants in there. But we're going from same size property and 0 to same size property and 650 towards that end goal. Is the 650 going to be tied into the action item that we have? It's a swap and all in one item, or is that
Yes.
two different items?
I believe it's all going to be filed together. Yes.
And will that 650 go into general fund or into a special account? You mentioned a
escrow
special
account. It'll go to an escrow
account. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Clark. Councilman Espinoza.
So to sort of follow up on Councilman New's question, it sounded like you said there would be a process, but I don't want the sort of public process about development. Are there any guarantees codified in this agreement about the nature of retail that in fact, not just in their development plan, but in the agreement that secures the ground floor adjacent to both sides of the park as retail, and any agreements with the surrounding community with respect to, entering into GNAs if there are any sort of establishments or, that are subject to sort of licensing requirements and what have you. This is the only embedded business district in this area. And as we know, my own personal experience with Tennyson Street, the zoning that is there could be 100% retail. I mean, 100% retail or 100% residential. And we would lose this sort of embedded opportunity. So are there actual agreements in place that would compel an owner to actually follow through on providing neighborhood serving retail in addition to their residential component as well?
There's nothing in the agreement that codifies that. It is certainly our intention, and it certainly is, I think, the driving reason for the developer who's here today. He can certainly talk to that. For why a park will be successful there is because of adjacent retail. I believe that's his driving interest as well. So I think it's both of our interests to have adjacent retail, but there's nothing in the agreement that codifies that.
Yeah, I think that it would be prudent for the city in this arrangement to secure those sorts of agreements to make sure that these developments, whether it's this developer following through on their plans that are before the city, or future developers, that they're encumbered to sort of deliver on these things going forward. And that if a development, if the financing doesn't come through or something like that, and the whole thing goes bust for an Trump a president going crazy and tanking an economy, that there is some assurance other than the land reverting back to the situation that we are in right now, and maintaining that, because again, the development potential of this land is, in my estimation, between 20 and 30 doors. Or if it was an apartment building, at least that many keys. And that is significantly higher than $650,000 worth of value. And yes, there's a land transaction going on here, like for like, but there is a benefit to a developer to have that amenity embedded in their development than it is adjacent and across the street.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. That's kind of a zoning issue, really. We would not have certainty if we stayed where we were, that there would be retail on the other side of the street either. So we're moving to a place where the developer is actively pursuing retail adjacent to the park. If we stayed where we were, we have no assurances that wouldn't change over time and become residential as well.
But this is, why I'm putting it on you is this is one of those weird situations where parks on their own land is their own zoning official largely. And so you can't, so this is a situation where you're involving multiple agencies, and so those neighborhood preserving character concerns should be and could be addressed by the city in all of this transaction. And those, the same negotiations that we do with developer agreements on private rezonings in my district could actually be followed through by the city in this case. It looks like all you've done is secure land for money and a date on when construction is started. But there are a whole host of other vectors here that also could be and should be addressed.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Councilman Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to piggyback on that, I guess I'm confused. Councilman Espinoza, you seem to be comparing this to what we could accomplish, and I'm not saying we should shoot for the moon, but to draw back to what is on the table. Right now, we have a parcel. The zoning is the same on both sides of the street. Mm-hmm. So we have a parcel with no agreements and no plan that could also succumb to the 100% and no lever with which to negotiate at all, versus a parcel across the street where we might not have it as solidified as maybe we could through some sort of developer agreement, but we have someone who is imminently going to develop in a way that you seem to think is preferable, plus the money to build. So I guess I wasn't following. Were you saying that it would be better on the other side, or just that we should shoot even more for the moon than? I was confused.
So the fact that developers, that property owners in the area sort of posited this idea and approached the city because they actually probably recognize there's a potential win-win for the community and for their development. By having open space and park space adjacent to ground serving region, all these aspects that are good about this approach are not a requirement in any way, shape, or form. This is the thing I constantly sort of bring up with my constituents is there's a difference between zoning and entitlement and proposal. And so I think the proposal is solid. I would like to see it codified more so than a private agreement about land, but these other aspects, use, scale, whatever, use, amenity, and access.
Thanks for that clarification. I just was, where our current land is, we have none of that opportunity. And so while this isn't fully baked into a development agreement, it does seem to be further along that path than where we are right now.
But if we were to approve just an agreement, the city could enter into, the city could negotiate these terms. If we were to just move forward without it, all we've done is grant a sort of the ability to transfer that, and the same use by right exists regardless without these sort of provisions.
Okay. You had any other questions, Councilman Clark?
No.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks very much. Councilman Herndon?
I was just going with Councilman Espinoza. So is there, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the design for the Park Hill Commons, but my understanding is that the HM Capital has gotten permitting, so digging will begin. So is there a fear that should this go through, that suddenly he will scrap all those plans and then just change the overall idea, and you want to make sure that the current plans that are in place continue? Is that, I'm just trying to understand what that gain is by just having that in ink.
Yes, is that somebody, whether it's this development as proposed, is in fact completed, or if only a portion of it gets completed, the rest of it is being compelled to be completed by whoever assumes that project. Because right now, there is no such guarantee. If at some point they proceed along and they decide, I'd rather have that, I need that $650,000 to bankroll my development, I'm going to back out of that deal, give the city back its property across the street. There's,
You can't, correct me if I'm wrong, should this go through, that escrow happens immediately, correct? It's
Yes.
not, it's not until, okay.
but if the agreement, if it's not tenable, an agreement can be undone just as well as it's been done. And so if they basically say, I can't follow through on that, then they could just as well develop all their existing entitlement in a different manner, infill that block instead of put a park there, if the city was amenable to that. And I can't see why if the city's basis is that it's all, it's land for land and these two parcels are equal, why they would force a developer to sort of, in that situation where they're doing that, to struggle. And so I think the city would probably undo that and grant that request. I mean, I don't know, because, again, these agreements are purely a land exchange that could just be as undone as it is being done.
Yeah, but,
Sure.
but we don't have the lawyer here, but if things went awry, I don't think we can force somebody to do something. They suddenly went bankrupt. We can't say, you must build this, even though we don't have one of the attorneys, but I can't imagine that we would have that kind of
I
authority.
mean, bottom line is, we could be in this exact same position.
Oh, we have a lawyer.
If we have an attorney in the house? Sorry.
Brad Beck with the City Attorney's Office. In its current form, the land swap transaction is land for land plus an escrow, immediate funding of a $650,000 escrow that can be taken down by parks delivering invoices for the development of the park. That's it.
Correct. And so it's not Parks land.
No, the swap occurs now,
Okay.
so the parks takes control of the parcel now and has the ability to fund up to $650,000 through the escrow under their control.
So this October 2019 date, if the developer is still utilizing that land to complete their project.
They would be doing so under a leaseback, which is terminable by the city at its discretion.
Correct. So, meaning that we will always work with this developer to see the entire proposal follow through. Now, if that developer does struggle, do they not have the ability to approach the city and negotiate this undo these terms, this land swap?
Well, anything could be negotiated at any time, but there's no legal requirement for the city to give back the land. The city would
Correct.
control the land.
Correct. But, and that
Completely.
the owner this developer would own the parcel across the street.
That's true.
So if all things are being equal, do you see the city basically saying now, making this commitment that no way in heck would we ever, despite whatever happens, we would never revert back to owning the original Excel parcel without?
I'm not sure why the city would undo the transaction, given the fact that they have a parcel that they currently want and $650,000 to provide the park there.
It's kind
So,
of la-la.
I guess I'm not understanding the question. I apologize.
I think we probably, maybe take that offline.
I'd be happy to.
well, I tried to take it offline, and what I'm trying to do is make sure that there is, the only assurance is if all of this gets completed. And yes, the current thinking is that nothing can come in the way, and all of this would in fact be followed through, executed, and built. And that's probably more likely than not. I will admit that.
And I would agree with you with respect to the park parcel. With respect to the developer's parcels, I can't speak to what the developer can and can't perform with his own parcels.
Okay, so then that was the only added assurance that I was looking for, is how the developer followed through with, because we talked about things about that development proposal, and yes, there is something in permitting right now, but making sure that development follows through in much the same way that we have commitment on the actual park portion.
Yeah, and the developer has a site development plan that shows retail spaces adjacent to the park, and so that's what he's permitted to build. If he wanted to change that, he'd have to get a new site development plan, I assume, if CPD's in the room. But
Right, but that's
so that's
just
a
a
public process.
resubmittal.
Right.
you
Well,
know.
but that's a process. that you have to go
And that's what I'm saying. Everything in his boundaries, both adjacent to this parcel and across the street, are all subject to whatever they choose to do. And if those are,
City has a say.
but there's an important neighborhood serving aspect, and the city has a seat at this table, I would hope that we would compel ground serving retail, uses that are consistent with the surrounding adjacent community, that and would support the park itself, that we are allowing this transaction to occur. So that actually the fact that this 100-year-plus community would end up not just with the developer's best asset, but one that that the community has put input on, and not just within the boundary of the park, but in those parcels, and those things that are going to affect the use and function of that park.
The issue comes down to whether we compel him to build retail, or we believe that parks attract retail. And we believe that parks attract retail, and that this neighborhood's commercial block will flourish with both retail and park adjacent to each other, and we believe that to be true.
I believe that to be true too, which is why on the River Clay project and in the Element 47 project, we made that a term of a PUD and an RMU 30 rezoning, so that actually we would get that. And it's why I put forward Jefferson Park rezoning that restricted ground floor residential use in a mixed use zone district, specifically to make sure that these things are addressed. It is a difference between entitlement, belief, and entitlement and requirement. And so I am just saying we should have a requirement as a term in all these negotiations, rather than just blind faith that whatever is out there right now will in fact be followed through. Because this is again how La Loma went from being 5-story and 196 units to 700 units and 17 stories. There's a difference between, we don't have that scale, but we don't have an assurance. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Thank you very much, Councilman. Councilman Herndon, did you?
I think I just got where Councilman Espinoza was going. I don't share that sentiment. I think we have a $650,000 assurance that the developer is going to move forward with this plan, a site development plan. He's been to numerous community meetings for the past July and March 2 years, I believe, of what he was been willing to do to move forward. So, I mean, this is a presentation anyway. I'm pretty sure when this comes back to committee, there's not time to tweak that agreement. That's not something that is important to me, but I'll see how the rest of the committee and council move forward, but just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman New.
Yeah, I think this deal is going to work out fine. And Gordon, the main thing to me is you're assuring that as you're working for the design of this park, that you're going to be working with the neighborhood and addressing those objectives and coming up with an agreement so that you create a great park for this neighborhood. And that's the assurance I've been given, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, are there any other comments?
No, it was precisely because we were at this stage at a informational thing that I even articulated it, because there's actually time for those ideas to be heard and by the owners, and see if in fact there are ways to say, yeah, we're so committed to this that we'd be happy to entertain that, by the time you come back
Okay,
next week.
thank you, Councilman. Nothing else? All right, this isn't an action item. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks for everybody's questions, and we will stand adjourned.